Despite the success of the Dwight Eisenhower administration, the election of his vice president, Richard Nixon, in 1960 was not a sure thing. This was because of a Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy from Massachusetts. Kennedy was handsome, intelligent, and charismatic, and came from a good bloodline. His family was a well-established Massachusetts family, and his father was active in politics. All of his sons served in World War II, with John F. Kennedy winning the Purple Heart for saving his fellow men aboard the PT-109 cruiser when it was drowned by a Japanese ship. In 1952, he met Jacqueline Bouvier, a socialite whom he married a year later, who had become renowned for her glamour and beauty during their time in the White House. The marriage was a happy one, producing 2 children. However, rumors of infidelity haunted the Kennedys for years to come. But the family was picture-perfect and telegenic, and so was JFK himself. And when he ran in 1960, he became a formidable opponent to Nixon's presidential odds. His charisma and charm was perfect for the television, and it contrasted greatly with Nixon's plainness. During their series of televised debates, the first in presidential history, Kennedy's charm and good looks contrasted him with Nixon, who was often sick and not attentive. Kennedy seemed like a leader. He seemed polished and charismatic, and he won a lot of support, including celebrity endorsements, as Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe greatly assisted in Kennedy's election efforts, Marilyn Monroe and Kennedy supposedly having an affair. The election was close, too close for comfort, but Kennedy's charm and optimism pushed him over the top, and on January 20th, 1961, he was inaugurated, giving one of the most important inaugural speeches in American history, where he encouraged Americans to do what they could for their country. Kennedy's vision for a young and up-and-coming generation was optimistic. Prompting America and the younger generation especially to do more, Kennedy created the Peace Corps in 1962 to provide relief throughout the world to suffering populations. Kennedy also encouraged America to do well in the space race, promising to put a man on the moon, NASA's goal at winning the space race, by the end of the decade, and Kennedy's dream would come true in 1969. Kennedy was moderate when it came to civil rights, but continued to press for equality for all people. The most defining features of his transformational presidency was the Cold War, however. Raging between the United States and the Soviet Union since World War II, it had threatened to destroy the world through nuclear arms, and the Soviets were led by Nikita Khrushchev, who was particularly aggressive. Since World War II, Germany had been the nexus of the Cold Wars. It had been occupied by the Allies and then divided into East and West, when NATO and later the Warsaw Pact were formed. West Germany was democratic and capitalistic, while East Germany was socialistic and communist. The former capital of Berlin, firmly in East Germany, was also divided between the West and the East, and for years many had tried to escape from the East and move to the West. This had prompted Khrushchev to create the Berlin Wall in 1961 to keep people from leaving. Armed guards, fortifications, barbed wire, and other detriments kept people from escaping to the West Berlin and to West Germany. Kennedy went to the Berlin Wall immediately and gave a speech in which he declared that he too was a Berliner. Kennedy believed strongly in standing up to communism wherever he faced it, and the closest threat was actually the island of Cuba, which had become communist under the leadership of Fidel Castro in 1959. The Cubans had quickly allied themselves with the Soviets, and Khrushchev believed that he could use the Cuban communists as a way to threaten the United States. Castro and Khrushchev became close, and this worried Kennedy, who the Soviets saw as weak after their initial meeting in 1961. This was worsened when Kennedy did not provide needed air support to Cuban counter-revolutionaries who were trying to retake the island from Castro in the Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961. To threaten the United States, Soviets began putting missiles in Cuba in October of 1962, missiles that could easily reach major U.S. cities. This became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy's response was to blockade the island. For weeks, tensions remained high, but eventually cooler heads prevailed, and Khrushchev gave up, removing the nuclear weapons from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. removing nuclear weapons from Turkey and thus avoiding a nuclear war. Despite some early blunders, Kennedy's stance against communism had remained ironclad and his popularity soared, and it seemed like Camelot, as Kennedy's young, vibrant administration was known, would last forever. However, in November of 1963, Kennedy traveled to Dallas looking to drum up support for the upcoming election. It was here that he was notoriously assassinated, one of the most gruesome deaths in American history. The country's morale was shattered. It was forever changed, and his family was forever devastated, and the United States would not be the same again without John F. Kennedy. And in many ways, despite his many successes and great accomplishments, the greatest part of Kennedy's legacy is what could have been had he lived.